Hello, Yakri here with another artifact video. So this time I want to talk about mulligans in card games and in relation to artifact in particular. Artifact doesn't appear to have a mulligan mechanic of any kind. And I've seen some discussion about that I thought was kind of interesting, about whether or not it was actually a good idea to have mulligans and whether or not this changes the skill cap of the game and whether or not this is going to lead to players getting screwed by RNG more often in terms of their opening hand. And I saw some interesting opinions getting thrown around, like the idea that removing mulligans from a card game doesn't affect your odds of being screwed by RNG in your opening hand. That was an interesting one, certainly. Not sure where they got that idea from. We'll talk about that more in a bit. But yeah. So I wanted to talk about it a bit in detail and like kind of analyze the decision. And I think it's actually a good decision. I do approve of the idea of removing mulligans, at least in the context of artifact, right? So I think if you remove mulligans from Magic the Gathering, it would be pretty horrible, and it would make the game much worse. It would be much more swingy. A lot of more interesting and fun deck concepts would become unplayable, and even the decks that would survive that and be fairly effective would have a larger random element, right? Like even like red deck wins. That's pretty much as reliable as decks get. It plays very linearly. There would still be problems with that. So, yeah, let's move on. It adds an extra component of skill to the game that's different from deck building or regular play. This is an argument I'm making, and I think it's pretty well defensible. When you're building a deck, it requires a lot of different planning and skill and whatnot, right? And there are a lot of elements that go into building a deck, stuff like considering card advantage, the amount of damage you're going to be able to deal, potentially combos, mana curve, etc. Right? Building it in artifacts is going to be a little bit different due to the heroes, but it's going to be a lot of the same thing, right? It's just planning, getting different components that go well together and that support each other, and sometimes knowing when to get cards that do kind of the same functionality as another card, so that you can add even more reliability to certain aspects of your play that are more important, and add intentionally less reliability to some aspects of your play that are less important, that you need to be in there, but you probably don't need to get one of those cards more than once by a certain turn, that kind of thing. Okay, so it gets pretty complicated. I don't actually want to do more than really briefly summarize the idea. So it has that certain type of gameplay skill to it, right? And I don't think mulliganing uses the same kind of skill set at all. To mulligan, you do need to know about your deck's mana curve, but it's a think on your feet problem, right? That's a better way to put it. It's a problem where you don't have all the information ahead of time. You're going to get into the game, you're going to draw your cards, and you see what you have. And you have to decide, based on that particular set of information, whether or not that's a good hand to keep. It requires knowledge of the deck you've built, but it's going to change based on which deck that you have built. It's going to change based on what you think or know your opponent's playing. Whether or not that information is available to you is going to vary game to game. Some games where it's a best of 3, that information will be available to you in the second game, and so forth. And so you have to take this consideration of the type of deck you're going to play, the type of strategy you're supposed to be using with it, and you have to make a on your feet decision on whether or not you're going to keep this set of cards. And you need to have a lot of general game knowledge to do it, and a lot of specific knowledge of the deck that you're playing and how it ought to be played. And so it takes an element of practice, even for a deck you've built yourself, and it's going to be a little bit unique from deck to deck. And so I think it's a little ridiculous to suggest that there isn't some skill to it, and that the skill to it might be absorbed by something else. I saw someone make a post saying that if you remove mulliganing from the game, it won't reduce the skill cap of the game, because sure, you won't have to mulligan, but you'll just have to be more careful when designing your decks. I think this is ridiculous, of course, because no one's being less careful while designing their decks already, right? There's no this situation where people are going to be able to put more skill into deck design without mulligans than they are right now, right? It's just going to remove a element of gameplay that is difficult from the game, which lowers the skill cap. It makes sense that way, right? And it's a little bit baffling that anyone's suggesting otherwise, honestly. And I think maybe my argument that it's different from deck building is a little bit weaker, but it is nonetheless a separate thing that you have to do. And it does require some element of practice with each specific deck. Okay, so mulliganing does add an extra component of skill. It's different from deck building, but Valve got rid of it, and I think it's a good idea. Well, why is that? Well, I think it's a good idea because mulliganing is kind of, to a new player, right? This is kind of different for us who are old hat at it, but when you're new at the game, it's very unclear. Not new at the game, new at card games where you can mulligan, right? Trading card games in particular. It's unclear how it helps you to mulligan. It's unclear when you should mulligan, and it's unclear what the actual impact of a particular mulligan that you made was a lot of the time when you're new at the game. It's very confusing. It takes some time to think through, well enough to make the best decision possible, even for more experienced players sometimes. Not all the time, of course. Once in a while you see a good hand and you know that this exact hand is great, and so there's nothing to it. But yeah, so it takes up time at the beginning of the game, and I think it's a difficult element for new players, and it kind of adds to like information overload. You throw up all the cards that they have in their hand. They don't really know what they do, and you say, all right, which ones do you want to keep, and which ones are you going to discard to replace with some other card that you also don't really understand the impact of. So it's kind of useless to noobs, and it adds extra information that they have to consider without actually helping them, and there isn't a really clear path for how to get better at it. So that's why I think it's kind of a good element to get rid of if you could, right? But there is a reason you want to keep it around, right? Aside from raising the skill cap, okay? There's a reason to keep it around, and that is this little statistics or probability presentation. Yeah, presentation. Let's go with that. So this is kind of simplistic, and it's important to point out that, of course, in an actual scenario, the probability of these events is not 50-50. But let's say you have a 50% chance of getting a good hand and a 50% chance of getting a bad hand, right? In a game with no mulligan, you just get one or the other. You don't have any control over it. There's a 50% chance that you get a good hand, 50% chance you get a bad hand. But let's say you add a mulligan, right? And that's a choice that you get, and it can push and you can push you into these different set of events, right? So you can get a good hand and you can keep it, and you can get a good hand and you can mulligan again and get another good hand. You can get a good hand and you can then keep it. Oh, but if you mulligan again, it's bad. So, and if you can get a bad hand and you can mulligan into it being good. So if we go through these first three scenarios, right? You get a good hand. All right, you keep it. Next scenario is that you get a good hand, but if you were to mulligan again, you don't know this, but you would get a bad hand. So you keep the good hand. All right, you're set. New players might mulligan into the bad hand, but we're going to assume that you are someone who knows what you're doing. So you get a bad hand. You know it's bad. You're screwed, so you mulligan. Get a good hand. Okay, you're set. Now, in the final scenario, the 1 in 4 chance, you get a bad hand, you mulligan it, get another bad hand, you're screwed. So basically the point is that here you have a 25% chance of just being screwed no matter what action you take, and in the former scenario you have a 50% chance of being screwed no matter what action you take. So it's twice as good for you to have this mulligan, right? And up to the point where, of course, you know, we don't want too many, because you just keep mulliganing indefinitely until you get the perfect hand, right? And there are other reasons you don't want to do that. Hopefully it's self-evident. If not, I want to squeeze it into this video discussion of that particular thing, right? Okay, so mulliganing does reduce the possibility of just getting stuck with a bad hand that's going to disadvantage you in a game. But there's a question of whether or not that's necessary, right? So like I said, the odds of getting a bad hand is not actually 50-50. Of course, mulliganing will still reduce the odds of getting a bad hand from whatever they are to less bad odds, right? It could be that there's a 90% chance of getting a bad hand because your deck is crap, and mulligan reduces it to, you know, like 82.3% or something, you know, based on weird factors. It wouldn't actually be an even 90% chance to get that number. All right, whatever. We're skipping past it. Point is, you can reduce the odds of starting the game with a bad hand by adding a mulligan to the game. In particular, this is a just discard all, replace your whole hand, don't go down any cards or anything, just discard all once type of mulligan. Other types of mulligans are more complicated. They have the same effect, but to a greater degree, or with like a side penalty, like a Magic the Gathering, you lose a card. So the probability effects are the same, but you get fewer cards, which disadvantages you. You get the idea. And so potentially, if you put yourself in that bad situation, the second bad is actually worse. Yeah. So this is the point. Some of the points I already made, but mulliganing makes the game harder for new players to pick up and play. And I think this is why Valve wants to get rid of it in Artifact. I think Artifact, and this is kind of like my personal opinion based on what I've seen about the game so far, I think it's actually really trying to appeal to casual players in kind of a clever way. I mean, let's not to show my bias too strongly, but I don't really like Hearthstone, and I think Hearthstone appeals to casual players in this kind of like almost insulting to your intelligence kind of way of like, haha, casual players like pretty colors and RNG and the game being really simple. That's it. And that's what people want, right? And casual players here, not necessarily meaning people who would rather play like checkers than chess, or people who just don't want to play complicated or challenging things, right? I'm not sure what else to phrase it as. Like people who like Candy Crush is like I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, it's casual, right? It's not like it's not meant to really super challenge you in an intense way. It's meant to be fun. And, you know, there's different levels of skill to it, of course, but, you know, it's not like a really competitive, get better, do better, huge amount of depth, this is hard type thing. And I think it's actually, but I think Artifact is actually meant to appeal to casual players. But by casual players, I mean people who haven't played card games before, people who don't have a ton of time to get into a game. You know, people who want to sit down and play a game, but they appreciate games with depth. They just don't have a lot of time to just figure out all these complex rules and deal with all this complex bullshit before they actually get into playing a game. People just want to sit down, start playing a game, and have fun with it. And but they would still like it to have some depth, have it challenge them, that kind of thing, right? And I think that group exists even within casual players. And the thing is that group and, you know, hardcore players, right? People who have a lot of time to really get good at games, a lot of time to spend on games, and are really competitive. I think those groups of people are not incompatible. It's just kind of hard to make them compatible, right? Because if you have a game like Dota 2, where it takes an insane amount of time to really get good at the game, and in fact it takes an insane amount of time to even really get into the game because of the amount of mechanical skill involved, because of the amount of like conventions you have to learn, and sort of like unwritten rules and strategies that you have to pick up, and stuff that is totally not obvious, and you have to learn from other players and stuff. I think it takes a huge amount of investment to be any good at that game, and if you're not any good at that game, you're going to get completely shit on. And so it makes it a very difficult game for someone to just hop into and play and have fun. If you're not invested in it already, it makes it a very bad game for casual players in a lot of ways. And I think they want Artifact to be this kind of like, I don't want to say one size fits all. I think they want it to be like a serious Hearthstone competitor, something that can appeal to a really wide audience, not everyone, but a wide audience, and for it to be approachable, right? I think that's the key word here. It's for it to be approachable, not easy, not simple, approachable. You should be able to see it and say like, hey, I could do that. Not I could beat a pro player easily. I could sit down and without too much trouble figure out how to play this game and then spend years slowly getting better at it, instead of having this thing where like, that's too complicated, there's fucking numbers everywhere, how does this shit work, there's so much math I have to do, kind of thing. Okay, so I really went on to this point for quite a bit, and I've got some more slides to go through. So let's see, did I miss anything? Yeah, Mulligans are kind of an additional blast of information you hit new players with. Because they are an additional element of skill, it's another thing you have to learn how to do that's kind of different from actually playing the game. It's kind of different from building decks. And so it can be just kind of like a little too much to load onto new players, especially if you're not playing versus other people who haven't played before. If you're playing versus people who've played a while, this could give older players a pretty significant edge. I've won a lot of Magic the Gathering games off of knowing how to do this when introducing friends to it. I'm not one of those people who goes easy on new players. I probably should, but you know, I don't know. I'm more like to, you know, make playful jokes after trashing my friends at things that I'm good at and they're not yet. It helps they'll probably be better at me than me eventually, and I gotta get the jabs in while I can, right? Anyway. So it slows down the start of the game. That's another downside to that. So the other thing is that I think that Artifact is trying to set itself up, or Valve is trying to set Artifact up, or Richard Garfield. I'm not really sure who's behind this particular part of the game design the most here is trying to set itself up to not need sort of the crutch of mulliganing to reduce the RNG of starting hands, right? The highest mana cost card in any of the starting decks is 8. I don't know if that's going to be the highest in the game, but that's kind of similar to the kind of curve you see in Hearthstone. Hearthstone, there are bigger cards, right? And there are bigger cards in, say, like Elder Scrolls Legends, and a lot of these games that use this sort of similar mana format to Hearthstone, to Artifact, where you just start with 1 mana and you crank up mana every turn. Now, I know what you're thinking. Yakri, it's 3 mana. I'm getting to that. So Artifact starts at 3 mana, and it still has this like kind of cost curve where like 8 mana cost cards are a big deal. They're extremely powerful, and they massively change the state of the board. If there are ever any higher mana cost cards than 8, I'm gonna bet they're probably not going to be hero spells, and they're probably going to be like really huge deals. Something you might include one of in your deck for a like game finisher. And the fact that that's kind of the situation for the high mana cost cards. 8 mana cost cards are the highest we're seeing so far, and they're incredibly impactful. And you start at 3 mana. That's an important thing here. It means that if you start the game with a lot of high cost cards, you may not be as screwed as you might think. Now, of course, if you started the game with only 7-drop cards, okay, that's probably pretty bad. But this is unlikely to happen. For a variety of reasons, which we're going to get to on here as well. But yeah, so starting with a disproportionate number of high-end cards might not be too much of a problem because you're going to get to use those cards relatively soon. Not a lot of games are going to be finishing before you have the opportunity to play those cards. You have 3 lanes, so when your 7-drop cards come online, if you've set yourself up correctly, right, you can have a situation where, sure, you've got 4 7-drops, but maybe in one round when you can first cast those, you can cast 3 of them, and just have a huge impact on the game immediately. The whole thing is kind of set up so that there's only so far you can be screwed by getting your higher cost cards early on, right? And I think that that distance has been closed in Artifact. Yeah, so. And the item shop provides a secondary pool of cards for you to pull from. And aside from just giving you more cards, the item shop gives you an opportunity to get different kinds of cards, and it's for boosting your heroes, which can help to make up for not having a good starting hand. Yeah, you're going to get shit on pretty hard early on, but if you can get a little bit of gold with your hero placement, just from the base abilities of your heroes, you can use that gold to buy a couple items, use them judiciously, and hopefully buy yourself another turn so that you can actually start casting spells. The hero mechanic itself, I think, is pretty impactful for reducing RNG. You start with 5 heroes, and they're not drawn from your deck or anything. There's an RNG in bringing them back. There's some RNG in the initial 3-hero placement, but it's not too big of a deal. I think it's very impactful that you get to have those heroes and you can choose where they're placed. It gives you an opportunity to make sure that even with not a great starting hand, you are set up to be able to make more decisions and give yourself more advantages later in the game, and hopefully still pull off a win, even if it doesn't start out great for you. The deck size is also relatively small. I don't think it's like super different from Hearthstone, if I'm remembering correctly, but the combination of the heroes coming with their hero cards, which you get 3 copies of, it kind of enforces this reliable deck format where as a new player you can't just go haul off and get like a crap ton of one-off cards. You are going to be stuck with to a certain extent cards of the colors that you're going to be using the most. You'll have like a fairly good color ratio by default just because of the heroes coming with their own cards. Yeah, and the heroes have their own abilities, and you have the actual heroes to place themselves. It's great. Multiple boards is another aspect that I think helps with the RNG, right? Which is that it helps deplete your resources across these different boards, and it means that if you don't start off as well as your opponent, there's still only so much resources that they have to dump into a single board. In terms of turns and like the amount of stuff that goes on, it really feels like, and because I've been watching the stream of them playing it, it really feels like a lot happens before a game of Artifact ends. It's still pretty fast. There's a turn timer that causes you to lose the game if you go too far in it, but you get a lot of actions in. You have a lot of extra card draws, and not a lot, but a decent amount of extra card draws, and the secret shop comes in quite a bit. And so I think this spreading out the game across multiple boards, meaning that you need to win 2 boards, or really, really, really heavily over a long period of time win 1 board, with how hard it is to burn down an ancient, has really done a great job of drawing out the game enough to kind of put distance between the start of the game, the impact of the start of the game, and how the game ends. And I think they've just done a great job of this, actually, overall. You know, in Magic the Gathering, you have those times. I played a lot of Magic the Gathering, which is where most of my card game experience comes from. You have those times where you get a starting hand and it's not good, and you mulligan as much as you reasonably can, and it's still bad. And then you just draw into mana or something. You just draw cards you don't need, and you know there is nothing you could have done to win that game. And it feels terrible. But it doesn't actually happen that often, even in Magic the Gathering. Magic the Gathering is worse than Hearthstone at this. And Magic the Gathering is definitely worse than Artifact at this. I think Hearthstone, honestly, may very well end up being worse than Artifact at this in the end. But, oh gosh, I must have had, like, I don't even know, over 2 years playing the game, only a handful of games. I could probably, if I could remember them all distinctly, I could probably count them on one hand. I can remember at least 3 times that it happened, for sure. I think that's about it, though. Well, okay, maybe not single games. It's more like series, right? And I think they kind of do a good job of making the, like Richard Garfield has said, making the 3 boards kind of feel like a mini series, and kind of make sure that there are enough opportunities for you to triumph if you are the more skilled player. So yeah, I didn't go onto this section soon enough, I guess, because I already talked about most of this. So yeah, I think this is meant to be a competitor with Hearthstone, and in some ways I think it's meant to sort of show up some of the other digital card games, and I think they've done a good job in a lot of ways. We'll have to, I think I'll have more criticisms once I've played it actually, but I'm really liking a lot of the things about how it's designed. I'm liking this idea of removing mulligans. I like the automatic combat and the fact that damage is calculated out and shown for you very distinctly. I think they've done a good job of removing some aspects of skill from card games that are actually kind of tedious, kind of annoying for new players to pick up, and I think kind of stop people from getting into this genre of games. And so that's why I approve of removing mechanics like this, because it does add more skill to the game. It does make the game a little more skill-based, a little less randomness-based. But I'm not sure it's a kind of skill that's valuable, right? In kind of the same way, I know not everyone will agree with me like this, I really don't like Counter-Strike, right? Not playing it, actually playing it's fairly fun, but I don't like watching it, and it's not the kind of thing that, although I enjoy it somewhat, it couldn't never inspire me to really reach a high level of play, or even try to. Whether or not I actually could, probably not. But because when people get to a super high level of play, it's incredibly mechanical. And by mechanical, I don't just mean mechanical skill, I mean like a robot. The plays are... There's so many aspects of that game that are really by rote, and so it makes it a lot less interesting. There's just enough thinking on your feet that it's quite a skill-based game still, but it's not very... I think that kind of sums it up. It's not very interesting. I don't think it's very interesting to me. Obviously, a lot of people enjoy it, but I think that's partly because it doesn't have enough randomness in it. It doesn't have enough stuff to make you think on your feet, and it has a little bit too much of a dependence on this like incredible, like honed to an incredible level, these sort of skills that are a little bit tedious and a little bit uninteresting, right? Versus like thinking on your feet, actual strategizing, thinking about like more complex strategy, doing interesting things, combos, good plays, that kind of thing. Yeah, bit of a vague concept, I guess, but okay. So yeah. Let's see, I felt like I had another thing on this. Nope, that's it. Okay, so that was pretty much everything I wanted to talk about. To summarize, I think that I think the removal of mulligans is a good thing. I really hope it's I can't remember if they've actually said that they intend this to never have mulligans. I really hope it's not something that they walk back, actually. I hope they try and fix the issues in other ways, if there are any with this. I think this game is actually going to be pretty new player friendly. It's kind of hard to tell, right, from the perspective of someone who's played a lot of card games before. So I'm hoping I can introduce some of my friends to it when it comes out, and hopefully we'll see how they deal with it. And I don't know, I like introducing people to new games. I like teaching people about new games, and so it's very much like something I'm passionate about, that games are approachable, right? Not necessarily easy, just approachable. Approachable meaning they're easy and fun to get into, whether or not they're easy and fun to play. So thank you all for watching. Yakri out, and I hope to all see you all in game in October.